Hello there, my fellow mobile tech aficionados. It's tablet time today, and I am not just talking about any tablets here, but basically the best of the best, at least when it comes to Microsoft and Apple. We will compare the latest iteration of the absolute beast that is the iPad Pro in its 2024 M4 flavor, with a Surface Pro on the Windows side powered by Qualcomms Snapdragon Silicon. And before we get into it, I'm a Windows guy through and through, so I will mostly stick to our objective measurements to keep things fair and level, and will only touch up on my personal opinion and experience ever so slightly. Since, to be honest, it has been quite a while since I used Apple's hybrid laptop phone Frankenstein OS, and I probably missed a lot. But let's get into it and see which one is the perfect fit for you when looking for a sleek everyday computing companion. Let's start with the iPad. This one has been out for a while now, but if you haven't had the chance to hold it until now, it's simply mind-blowing. This puppy is so incredibly thin that it makes you wonder how the mad scientists in Apple's engineering department could fit anything in here at all. But they did, and this one comes with the latest M4 SoC, 16 gigs of RAM and a 1TB SSD. Which will cost you, but more on that later. Very much like the Surface Pro, this is also the first iPad ever to get the OLED treatment. And Apple being Apple, this is not your ordinary OLED, but it's one of the first devices to feature a tandem variant of the self-emitting display tech refreshing at 120Hz. And well, it also makes for a great light source if you need one. The Surface Pro's variant matches the refresh rate but cannot keep up in the brightness department. And alongside the 16 gigs of memory, we get Qualcomm's higher-end X Elite X1E 8100. Which makes you wonder, is Apple really the only company on the planet that can come up with CPU names that people can actually remember? Before we get into the nitty-gritty details, let's talk about pricing. As you may have guessed, neither of these two is what you would call a budget option. Our Surface Pro, complete with the optional keyboard and pen, will cost you just shy of $2,000, even though Microsoft is having it on sale right now for roughly $1,700. Mind you, this is the older keyboard. If you want the added flexibility of using it without it being physically connected to your tablet, Microsoft also says an update for quite a bit more. On the other hand, the iPad with the matching Magic Keyboard and pen will lighten your account balance with a pretty eye-watering sticker price of almost $2,400. So yeah, that's that. When it comes to the overall build quality, there's not really anything to complain about for both devices. The iPad has the edge though, since it's just so incredibly thin and dense, which will take some time to wrap your head around. The Surface feels and looks slightly bulkier, especially in this comparison, even though it is not a large device at all. The additional heft is well used though, since as always the Microsoft tablet comes with a built-in kickstand. That would probably also be my biggest gripe with the iPad. On its own you cannot really do much with it, and while this is a problem you also have with the Surface, if you do not opt for the keyboard you can at least put it somewhere, which is not an option with this one. In the connectivity department, the Surface has the edge with a pair of USB-C 4.0s, while the iPad Pro has to make do with a single connector of the same standard. This is also one of my main complaints with the iPad. The potential of it being more than just an entertainment device is sprinkled throughout my experience with it, but there are also so many little things that kind of break this experience quite a bit. While the iPad Pro has many neat features for video calls, like the ability to focus on the person speaking, when it comes to pure image quality, the Surface Pro is the very clear winner here, and must sport one of the best webcams on a mobile device I have come across in, like, forever. With tablets this thin, your maintenance options are limited, or well, rather non-existent with the iPad. The Surface is not great either, but at least offers an easily accessible NVMe slot to upgrade storage, and as far as we know the battery is also screwed in, even though it's hidden beneath a glued-in display. As I mentioned before, I got both tablets with their respective pens and keyboards, and both are really good. They offer a similar amount of tactility and travel, though the Magic Keyboard has the edge when it comes to stability since it's flat on your desk, while the Surface variant is of course elevated. That said, it's not really a problem and still allows for a very good typing experience. You just have to keep in mind that you will need a lot more surface area, pun intended, because of the kickstand. So how about the pens? Well, you could probably make a full video about both, and since I am not an illustrator or digital artist, I will just give you my personal impression. The Surface Pen is great, it is very responsive, even more so than the active pens you can usually find on other Windows devices. But I would say the Pencil Pro feels a touch more direct. I could easily work with both for what I do, but I can understand why the iPad Pro is so well received in the digital art community if you can work around its software limitations. But let's talk displays, and both of our contenders today deliver when it comes to their respective OLEDs. While adjusting brightness manually, our measurements reveal numbers just shy of 600 nits for the iPad and the Surface. And utilizing Apple's ambient sensor bumps the Pro up to 1000 nits, and it's asking for sunglasses with HDR content that can peak at more than 1600 nits. The Surface maxes out at roughly 920 nits, but can keep up with Apple's offering regarding color space coverage. It's also doing slightly better when it comes to factory calibration, even though it would take a very trained eye to spot the difference here. Both tablets share their maximum PWM frequency of 480 Hz, and unfortunately there's a very slight grain on the Surface Pro's display, which is quite noticeable, especially on brighter content. If you want to dive deeper into our measurements and general display experience, do not forget to check out our written reviews. As always, there is a lot more on our website. But how about performance? With the Surface, you have of course a lot more control about your performance experience as with the iPad. If that is a good or a bad thing, well, I guess that depends on you. We decided on the best performance mode for the Surface and the 12-core Snapdragon X Elite, which must compete with the 10-core M4 in the iPad Pro. Of course, you will probably not use any of these two for super intense computing scenarios. And given that we are talking about two very different operating systems here, there are only a few synthetic tests to allow for an apples-to-apples comparison. In Geekbench though, both SoCs are almost tied in multi-core scenarios, while Apple reigns supreme in single-core. Crossmark, a broader test for overall system performance, also shows Apple's tablet with quite the advantage, and in 3DMark's Wildlife Extreme, well, GPU performance has never been Qualcomm's strong suit. Which kind of brings me to my biggest gripe with both of them. And again, keep in mind that this is my subjective impression and it's okay for us to disagree here. While I prefer Windows, since it gives me access to all of my software and games without having to rely on special apps, even though your mileage may vary with Windows-on-ARM here, the Snapdragon platform simply does not have quite the computing grunt to enable me to play games or do a lot of video editing work on the Surface. On the other hand, the iPad seems to be fast enough on paper to handle these tasks, but it's hindered by its OS. And while there are iPad apps, for example for Photoshop or even Resolve, they either offer a limited experience or would require me to relearn them to some extent. Of course, this is possible if you really want to make it work, but for me it would simply not be an option. So both of these feel more like office, general productivity, and above all else, entertainment devices. They are pretty amazing in all of these workflows, but considering that you can get a pretty bonkers laptop even with a dedicated GPU at the very same price point and without the severe compromises that come with the respective platforms here, well, it would be a very tough investment for me. But please let me know how you feel about this particular situation. How would you use the Surface or the iPad, and whether or not it would be your primary device? Sound off in the comments below. Unfortunately, you have to live with fan noise with the Surface Pro, and if you really push it, it can become quite audible. If you want to make some noise, the iPad also has the edge with its speaker system. While the Surface is not really bad, it's simply not on the same level here. Battery life is again quite a bit better on the iPad, even though I was expecting a bigger difference here. But especially our results under full load show a very impressive lead for Apple's tablet. Alright folks, that should be it for today. I really enjoyed both the Surface Pro and the iPad Pro during my testing. And if you're in the market for a sort of do-it-all tablet, you cannot really go wrong with either. I would guess which one you prefer comes down to your overall allegiance when it comes to operating systems. So I would assume people being more familiar with Windows might go for the Surface, and the Apple folk will hardly consider anything else than an iPad. As a secondary entertainment device, iPad's offering is also very tough to beat. It wakes from sleep instantly, it's super portable, at least without the keyboard, and the screen is simply to die for, especially with HDR content. However, personally, I feel very limited by its OS when trying to do more than write emails and watch movies, and I would not be patient enough to try to make it work for more advanced workflows. But your mileage may vary here, of course, and especially if you're an artist, the stellar pen experience combined with platform-specific apps like Procreate, for example, and the ease of use are definitely strong selling points. That said, this one is insanely expensive. For the price, I would rather get something like the Surface G14, but I am a gamer and a video creator, so I definitely have a very different mindset when looking at mobile tech. The Surface also delivers in general. Its software limitations might be a bit less obvious, which can be good or bad depending on your perspective. While it runs Windows, it's Windows on ARM, and while most of the apps and software I use run without problems, your experience may vary once again. But it's well made, comes with the typical Windows flexibility and beats the iPad when it comes to ports and with the integrated kickstand, even though that one comes at the expense of a bit more heft to the tablet itself. It's a bit cheaper, but not that much, and I would have to argue the same way as with the iPad. If you can accept a bit more weight and a slightly thicker laptop, it would net you, in my opinion, a much more capable device. But again, that's me, and I would of course love to hear what you guys have to say. Please let me know in the comments below. That's it from me for today. Thanks a ton for watching. Do not forget to check out our recent videos and please leave your like and sub on your way out. My name is Alex, you have been amazing, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one. Take care.